Hi everybody, Peter Vogt, the Introvert Advocate here. And today's video is about the idea that your introversion is a tendency and not a type. It's a tendency and not a type. I was actually at an event this weekend for my wife's grandparents, a birthday event. And I ran into my wife's cousin Tom there, along with a bunch of other people, and we got to talking. Tom's a pretty introverted guy, I would say, based on my knowledge of him and my interactions with him. And he came up, he's got a couple little kids, and he was wondering he said to me, "Do you still write about introverts?" I go, "Oh yeah, quite a lot, all the time." And I'm always talking about it, always studying the topic. And he said to me something to the effect of, we're trying to figure out one of his kids. He said, we're trying to figure out his personality type. And I said, Tom, he doesn't really have a type. He's got a bunch of tendencies, just as we all do, because type doesn't really exist. Even though we use that word type all the time, it's a kind of a dangerous word to use when it comes to personalities, whether it's introversion and extroversion or any other aspect of personality. Now, I realize that the Myers-Briggs type indicator is a very widely used tool out there. Maybe you've taken the Myers-Briggs type indicator yourself. I sure have, several times. And I mean, in fact, years ago, back in the early 90s, when I was first learning about my own introversion, and I took the Myers-Briggs type indicator in graduate school, that was the very first time that I really even knew that there was a thing called introversion and extroversion, and that I tended toward the introverted side of things. It was sort of a big, liberating sort of eye-opener for me, and I'm always sort of grateful to the Myers-Briggs type indicator for that. But the one problem I have with the tool, that others do too, frankly, is the word type and the concept of type. Now, in the defense of the Myers-Briggs people, I don't think they're really arguing that there is such a thing as a pure type of anybody. I don't think that's what they're saying, but their use of the word type implies it. It's to the general public, to just Joe or Jane Sixpack, it can sound like these personalities, these parts of us that we have, are really types, when they really are just tendencies. They're tendencies that we have, but they're not foregone conclusions that we have about ourselves. Let me just read you I looked up the word tendency on dictionary.com, and this will sort of explain what I'm getting at. Here's a couple of the definitions that they give. One is a natural or prevailing disposition to move, proceed, or act in some direction or toward some point, end, or result. Okay. The second one is one that I really the second definition is one that I want to focus on here. They say tendency is an inclination, bent, or predisposition to something. That word predisposition is the key here, because a predisposition inherently means, you've got a very strong tendency, a very strong predisposition. You're sort of leaning toward, naturally, a certain way of being, but it leaves room for the idea that it's not always true for you. That's where the tendency versus type idea becomes so powerful and so important to you as an introvert, and to all of us as introverts. Because as I said, your introversion is a tendency, but it's not a type. Think about it in terms of, I don't know, I'm holding this camera in my right hand, as I always do for these videos, because I have a tendency to use my right hand. For shorthand, you might say I'm right-handed. But I can easily, in fact, let me just do it right now. If I want to, I can hold it in my left hand, and suddenly I'm doing this with my left hand, even though I typically have a tendency to use my right hand for most things. I'm capable of using my left hand to do certain things, and sometimes I go ahead and do that. But the fact remains is that typically I use my right hand because I just have this predisposition to do that. That is my tendency in life, is to use my right hand. The same is true for introversion. I have a tendency, a strong one in my case, toward introversion, but it doesn't mean it's an either or thing, that I am an introvert or an extrovert. It just means that I have a predisposition toward introversion that doesn't reach the full-fledged level of being an either or type. That's where the problem comes in. Because if you start to think it's black and white, either or, this or that, that's where the problems come in. And there's two reasons. There's two reasons why this matters. Because you might be thinking to yourself, rightfully so, in some respects, who cares? You're just playing word games. Well, it matters. This whole thing matters for two reasons. Why does it matter so much that you think of your introversion as a tendency, not a type? Well, for starters, a tendency is a strong tendency. And so if you think of your introversion as a lighthouse, let's say, it's always the place that is in your mind that you're always going back to naturally for the most part. You are drawn to it naturally for the most part. And so you want to have that be a part of your existence, because you do want to know how you best function in life, what your most natural propensity is, where your natural strengths are, and how you can play to your strengths in life and run with the wind, if you will, whenever you can. So it's important to know that you have this introverted tendency so that you can come back to it and let it be a part of your existence just naturally, instead of fighting it. But there's another big reason for understanding this whole concept, this difference between tendency and type also. And that's the fact that tendency leaves room for the fact that sometimes in life, for example, instead of being right-handed again, you want to go left-handed. You literally, if I'm holding this camera as I am now in my left hand, you are literally and figuratively seeing a different side of me. And sometimes in life, as an introvert, as somebody who tends toward introversion, you want to see or do things that would reveal another side of you, your more extroverted side of you. I love how Brian Little describes this, and he wrote just a fascinating book called Me, Myself, and Us, and he talks about this concept called personal projects, which are effectively just goals that you have in life, things that you want to do in life, or things that sometimes you need to do, that you're forced to do in life, even if maybe you don't want to. And he talks about how sometimes we engage in these personal projects for professionalism, is what he would say. So if I, for example, want to, as an introvert, if I want to make an impact in my field and I want to, let's say, do a local TED Talk, I might just be inspired to go ahead and do that, extroverted as it might be, for professional reasons, because I have some goal that I want to achieve professionally, some message maybe that I want to deliver. And so I go ahead and willingly go against my own introverted grain for the greater purpose of accomplishing that goal. The other reason that we will sometimes engage in these personal projects is literally out of love for somebody. So I might go to, let's say, I don't know, my wife's grandparents' birthday party this past weekend, as I was saying. Maybe if I didn't necessarily want to, but out of love and out of respect for them, for all those reasons, I go and I have a good time. And did I choose to go? No, not truthfully. But am I willing to go for that reason? Definitely. And again, it's just sort of like intentionally using my left hand, even though most of the time I prefer and tend toward using my right hand. So for those two reasons, we need to have this wiggle room, if you will. And I'm going to go back to my right hand because that is my tendency. Looking at your introversion as a tendency versus a type leaves you this wiggle room. It leaves you this wiggle room to do things that quote unquote are outside of your comfort zone as well. At the very same time that it says, you know, for the most part, 90% of the time, 95% of the time, whatever it might be, I really am a pretty introverted person and I just go with that. But those other 5%, those other 10%, I can do those extroverted things, or if I'm forced to do them, I can handle them with no trouble at all. All because I think of my introversion as a tendency, and I don't paint it into the corner of thinking of it as a black and white, either or, this or that sort of type. So keep that in mind. If you're somebody who tends toward introversion yourself, keep that in mind, that your introversion is always just a tendency. It's not a 100% pure type. In fact, our friend who coined the terms introversion and extroversion, Carl Jung, way back in the 1920s, 1930s, he actually said in one of his books, and this is almost a direct quote, he said, you know, there's no such thing as a pure introvert or a pure extrovert. That person would be in the lunatic asylum if it existed. It just doesn't. So think of your introversion, again, as a tendency. It's a tendency, maybe a strong one, but it's definitely not a type. I appreciate you watching today's video. As always, please share it with others if you think that they would find it useful or helpful. And in the meantime, if you'd like to learn more about what I am doing with my work with introverts and introversion, just visit my website anytime you'd like at introvertinsights.com. Thanks again for watching today's video, and I'll see you next time.